In this exercise, I'm going to show you some of the more advanced options that are available to you when you're making a new document. They aren't really, strictly speaking, advanced per se. That is, they don't require a ton more expertise. You just have to click on a little advanced icon to get to them, as you'll see. So we're going to make another new illustration. I'm not going to change this one right now. We'll see how to modify an existing new illustration in a future exercise. But for now, I'm just going to go back to the File menu, choose the new command in order to create yet another new document. That's Control-N or Command-N on the Mac. And let's say this time around I call this guy Newsletter. And I want 8 pages inside of this document. So I'll increase the number of artboards to 8, and I'll change my columns value to 4 so that I still have 2 rows to work with. And let's say I want to take that spacing value down just a little bit. I think my pages could be squished together a little more. So I want to take my spacing value down to, say, 1/4 inch, something along those lines. But I want to do it while remaining in points. So I want to keep points my active unit of measure, but I don't know what 1/4 inch is in points. Why then, I could just go ahead and change my spacing value to 0.25 in. Like that. So you can override the current unit of measure if you want to by entering that unit of measure right there. So 0.25 in will give me inches. Press the Tab key, and Illustrator goes ahead and converts it to the current units value, which is points. You can even do that with units that don't really work with each other, such as, for example, let's say I want 100 millimeters. I don't even know how big 100 millimeters is, and I press Tab after entering 100 mm, and it gets converted to 283.46 points. Well, who would have known that that's how it would work out? Or I could say, you know what? I want 0.25 quote, for example, for 1/4 inch, and press the Tab key, and that gets converted as well. Or I could say 1 divided by 3 quote, like that, and that automatically gets converted to 1/3 inch. So you have so much flexibility. Basically, when you're working with these units of measure here, you can just enter pretty much what you think you would be able to enter, and it will convert automatically. Now that I've entered 1/3 of an inch between each page, sounds great to me. I'm going to click on this double down arrow icon next to the word Advance. That's why I'm saying that this is an advanced exercise, even though it's not. We're just bringing up what Illustrator considers to be some advanced options, starting with color mode. Now, you have 2 different color modes that you can choose from. You have CMYK, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll keep on mentioning it for a little while until we're all familiar with what's going on. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which are the standard process color inks that are used most commonly in the world of commercial reproduction. So when you take a file to a printer and they print out a bunch of pages for you, for example, when you're making a newsletter or a book or some other professional document, why then CMYK is the way to go. If, however, you're making a document for the screen, by which I mean a web graphic, of course, or you're thinking of swapping back and forth with Adobe Photoshop, then you want to go with RGB, which is red, green, blue. And by the way, if you're creating an illustration that you hope to place inside of InDesign or QuarkXPress or one of those programs, you're looking at CMYK. A little bit of an oversimplification, but this is pretty much how it works. Anything in print, you want CMYK. Anything for the screen or the web or swapping back and forth with Flash or Photoshop, then you want RGB. I'm going to stick with CMYK. Next, we have raster effects. Now, by raster effects, Illustrator means anything that's ultimately going to get converted to pixels. So anything that has softness associated with it. And a classic example that you'll probably use with a lot of your illustrations is drop shadows. So what is the resolution of those pixel-based drop shadows? Because you can't really represent drop shadows as vectors, or at least that's not the most efficient way to go. Your pixel-based drop shadows, what is the resolution going to be? Do you want high resolution, 300 ppi, great for commercial reproduction? Do you want screen resolution, 72 ppi, which is sufficient for web graphics? Or do you want medium, which might be something in between? For example, maybe you're going to print your illustration to an inkjet printer and 150 ppi is going to be just fine enough. The thing is, as we'll see when we get to these kinds of pixel-based effects, the higher you go with your raster effects resolution value, the more time it takes to render those effects on screen, especially as you zoom in. Anyway, I'm going to stick with high because that's the default setting when you're working with a print style document. Next, I'm going to go to the preview mode here, and by default, it's set to default, meaning that you're going to see your graphics as they will print more or less. However, you could switch to the pixel display, which is great when you're working with the web. So if you're creating web graphics, this might be the way to go. That allows you to preview how your vector-based graphics are going to look when they're represented as screen pixels. And then finally, overprint. And overprint is the most technical of the options, but it's probably your best bet for print graphics. It's going to show you what your graphics look like if you overprint one object on top of another. So if you're mixing a cyan object with a magenta object and they're overprinting to produce a sort of a violet blue in the middle, well, you're only going to see that if you switch to overprint. And we'll see more about overprinting when we get to that topic in a later chapter. But for now, if you're creating a print graphic, either leave it set to default and don't worry about it, or set it to overprint so you have the best results possible. You can take advantage of the separation preview panel and so on. And then finally, you have this new option inside of Illustrator CS5, align new objects to pixel grid. And this is great if you have single pixel lines inside of your artwork. This is the most obvious use for it, that otherwise will drift over into neighboring pixels. So they end up turning fuzzy on you instead of nice and sharp. If you want them to remain nice and sharp, then you want to go ahead and turn on align new objects as pixel grid. But that is only, by the way, when you're creating web graphics and the like. If you're creating a print graphic, it doesn't matter and you can leave it turned off. It gets turned on by default, by the way, if you go ahead and select this web option to take advantage of the predefined web settings. I'm going to press Escape in order to hide that pop-up menu, and we're done inside this dialog box. Once again, as soon as I click OK, I create yet another new document that takes advantage of my newest settings. In the next exercise, I'm going to show you how to create your own new document preset. It's weird, but it can be very, very useful. You have to jump through some hoops, but it can be well worth the effort.